I never thought much about the old abandoned factory on the edge of town. It was just another relic of a bygone era, a crumbling monument to industrial decay. But that all changed the night I decided to explore it. It started as a dare. My friends and I were sitting around a bonfire, swapping ghost stories and laughing at how ridiculous they all sounded. Someone brought up the factory, claiming it was haunted by the spirits of workers who had died in a fire decades ago. I scoffed at the idea, but when they dared me to spend the night inside, I couldn't back down. I've never been one to turn away from a challenge. I arrived at the factory just after sunset, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple. The building loomed before me, its broken windows like empty eye sockets staring into the void. I pushed open the rusted gate, the hinges screeching in protest, and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and the smell of mildew. My flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing crumbling walls and rusted machinery. I made my way deeper into the factory, my footsteps echoing in the vast empty space. That's when I heard the voices. They were faint at first, barely audible over the sound of my own breathing. But as I moved further into the factory, they grew louder. They weren't speaking English, or any language I recognized. It was a guttural, alien tongue, full of harsh consonants and guttural growls. I told myself it was just the wind, or maybe the sound of rats scurrying in the walls. But the voices were too deliberate, too rhythmic to be random noise. They were coming from somewhere deep within the factory, and against my better judgment, I followed them. The voices led me to a door I hadn't noticed before. It was made of heavy steel, its surface pitted with rust. A faded sign above the door read, "Authorized personnel only." I hesitated for a moment, then pushed the door open. The room beyond was unlike anything I'd ever seen. The walls were covered in strange symbols, carved deep into the concrete. The floor was littered with broken glass and twisted metal, and in the center of the room stood a massive machine, its purpose unknown. The voices were louder here, almost deafening. They seemed to be coming from the machine itself, as if it were alive and speaking in some incomprehensible language. I approached it cautiously, my flashlight trembling in my hand. That's when I saw them. They were standing in the shadows, just beyond the reach of my light. At first I thought they were mannequins or statues, but as I moved closer, I realized they were something else entirely. They were humanoid, but their bodies were twisted and malformed, their limbs too long, and their faces featureless. They stood perfectly still, their heads tilted at unnatural angles. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The voices stopped abruptly, and for a moment, there was only silence. Then one of the figures moved. It was a small, jerky motion, like a marionette being pulled by invisible strings. The figure turned its head toward me, and I felt a wave of nausea as I realized it had no eyes, just smooth, blank skin where its face should have been. I stumbled backward, my flashlight slipping from my hand and clattering to the floor. The beam of light flickered, casting erratic shadows on the walls. The figures began to move, their movements slow and deliberate. They didn't walk so much as glide, their feet barely touching the ground. I turned and ran, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The voices started again, louder and more frantic than before. They seemed to be chasing me, echoing through the factory as I sprinted toward the exit. I burst through the front doors and into the night, the cold air hitting me like a slap. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing with questions. What were those things? What were they doing in the factory? And why did they feel so familiar? The next morning, I tried to convince myself it had all been a nightmare, but the scratches on my arms and the bruises on my legs told a different story. I couldn't stop thinking about the figures, their blank faces and unnatural movements haunting my thoughts. I went back to the factory a week later, determined to prove to myself that it had all been in my head. But when I arrived, the building was gone. In its place was an empty lot, overgrown with weeds and littered with trash. I asked around town, but no one seemed to remember the factory. They looked at me like I was crazy when I described it, their faces filled with pity and confusion. I started having nightmares after that. In them, I'm back in the factory, surrounded by the faceless figures. They don't move or speak, but I can feel them watching me, their presence suffocating, And every time I wake up, I hear the voices, faint but unmistakable whispering. Thank you for tuning in to Mr. Nightmares Radio. If you enjoyed this spine-chilling story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more terrifying tales. Your support helps keep the nightmares alive. Let me know in the comments. What's the scariest thing that's ever happened to you? I might feature your story in an upcoming video. And remember, if you dare, share this video with a friend if you think they can handle it. Until next time, stay safe.